There is a haunting question that quietly trails many of us well into adulthood, long after we framed our diplomas or walked off the graduation stage. It's a question we often suppress, dismiss, or bury beneath job titles and paychecks. Was it worth it? All those years, all those tests, all those classrooms with fluorescent lights and desks in rows. We were told this was the path to success, security, and wisdom. But why then do so many of us emerge from the education system feeling unprepared, uninspired, or even deceived? We were promised enlightenment, but handed a checklist. We were told to stay in school because education was the key, the golden ticket, but no one told us which door it opened. And somewhere along the way, the word education stopped meaning what it once did. It stopped being a sacred quest for knowledge, growth, and meaning, and became a system, an industry, and, for many, a cage. This isn't just a modern problem. Since the dawn of civilizations, societies have battled with how to shape their young. The ancient Greeks debated whether education should produce good citizens or good philosophers. In Confucian China, education was deeply moral, a tool to cultivate virtue. Meanwhile, in medieval Europe, it was a luxury for the clergy and elite, not a right, but a privilege. Education has always been entangled with power. Who gets it, who defines it, and what it's really for. And yet, despite centuries of evolution, one thing remains unchanged: the promise that if you simply follow the system, if you obey the curriculum, if you earn the right grades and accolades, you will find fulfillment. But here lies the great deception. We confused schooling with education, memorization with wisdom, and standardization with self-discovery. Today, in a hyper-connected, rapidly changing world, that deception is unraveling. Students are burning out, not lighting up. Creativity is often stifled rather than celebrated. And many adults carry a quiet grief, a sense that they missed something essential. Not because they didn't try hard enough, but because the system never asked who they truly were. In this video, we'll peel back the layers of this cultural illusion. We'll explore how the modern education system was shaped and misshaped by industrial revolutions, colonial legacies, and economic agendas. We'll dive into the psychology of learning, the pain of conformity, and the hidden hunger for purpose that the system often fails to feed. But this isn't a call to burn it all down. It's a call to awaken, to remember what education was always meant to be, because your mind is not a container to be filled. It's a fire waiting to be lit. To understand how we got here, to a world where education feels more like a transaction than a transformation, we need to trace its origins. Education, in its truest form, was never meant to be a rigid system. It was an organic process of initiation, growth, and identity building. In ancient times, to be educated was to be shaped, not just intellectually, but morally, spiritually, even existentially. You were meant to become someone, not just to know something. In ancient Greece, the word paideia described a holistic education that aimed to shape a person's character and soul. It wasn't about exams or career prospects. It was about becoming virtuous, wise, and worthy of participating in society. Cato's Academy wasn't a place for job training. It was a garden for the soul, where students wrestled with philosophy, ethics, and the great questions of human existence. Similarly, in the East, Confucius emphasized moral cultivation. Education was not about personal achievement, but about harmonizing oneself with the greater order, with family, with society, with the Tao. Fast forward to the Middle Ages in Europe, where education took a different turn. Its knowledge was hoarded by the church and the elite. Latin, theology, and philosophy were taught in isolated monasteries and universities. The purpose here was not the awakening of the individual, but the preservation of hierarchy. Education became a gatekeeper, a filter through which only the privileged could pass. But the real rupture, the moment the soul of education began to fracture, came with the Industrial Revolution. In the 19th century, factory owners and governments needed disciplined, obedient workers, so they built schools to reflect factories. Bells rang like shifts. Desks were lined in rows. The goal: efficiency, standardization, repetition. It was not about nurturing curiosity or individuality. It was about producing citizens who would follow orders, sit still, and not question authority. Think about that for a moment. The system we still use today was modeled not on the needs of the human spirit, but on the needs of machines. Horace Mann, one of the pioneers of public education in America, once said, "Education is the great equalizer of the conditions of men." It was a noble idea, and in many ways, public schooling has opened doors for millions. But even man's dream was quickly entangled with political motives, economic interests, and a silent curriculum: conform, obey, succeed. And this is where the great deception begins. Over time, society began to equate education with credentials. A degree became a symbol of intelligence. A grade became a measure of worth. Learning was no longer about the expansion of the soul. It was about external validation. Questions shifted from what kind of human are you becoming to what can you produce for the system. Even today, education systems around the world remain deeply rooted in 19th century logic. We teach children as if they're all the same age, with the same abilities, and destined for the same future. We rank their intelligence based on how well they memorize information, not how deeply they think, feel, or create. And yet, we act surprised when students feel disengaged, anxious, or lost. This isn't just a failure of design, it's a philosophical crisis, because education, in its essence, is a profoundly human act, supposed to help us uncover meaning, ask bigger questions, and find our unique voice in a noisy world. But when education is stripped of wonder, curiosity, and inner development, it becomes something else entirely: indoctrination disguised as enlightenment. And so, we must ask, what do we want education to be? A tool for survival, or a path toward awakening? At the heart of the modern education crisis lies a deeper, often unspoken, psychological truth. Human beings are not machines, and learning is not a linear process. Yet the system we are raised in treats us as such. It tries to reduce the mystery of human potential into standardized test scores, fixed timelines, and rigid labels like gifted, average, or failure. But the mind, especially a child's mind, is not a spreadsheet. It is a wild garden, okay? And what it needs is not control, but cultivation. Modern psychology offers a rich lens through which we can see the damage this approach causes. Carl Rogers, a pioneering psychologist and founder of humanistic psychology, once said that the only person who is educated is the one who has learned how to learn and change. But our systems rarely teach us how to learn. They teach us how to perform. From an early age, we are trained to seek approval from teachers, from parents, from institutions, and in doing so, we begin to outsource our sense of worth. This is the root of what psychologists call extrinsic motivation, where our drive comes from external rewards, grades, gold stars, applause. The tragedy is that this often kills our intrinsic motivation, the natural human desire to explore, discover, and create for its own sake. You see this in toddlers who ask why 100 times a day. They are born philosophers. But somewhere between kindergarten and high school, that curiosity fades. Not because it died, but because it was buried under pressure, comparison, and fear of being wrong. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research on the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset is also deeply relevant here. A fixed mindset tells students, you are smart or you're not. You are good at math or you're not. This mindset, reinforced by traditional grading systems, creates anxiety and shame. In contrast, a growth mindset encourages failure as part of learning. It teaches resilience. But the structure of most classrooms rewards the opposite: perfection over progress, speed over depth, results over reflection. This psychological conditioning doesn't just affect academic performance, it shapes identity. Students begin to believe they are only as good as their last report card. And this belief follows them into adulthood, manifesting as imposter syndrome, chronic self-doubt, and an inability to value themselves outside of achievement. There's also a deep social cost. Education is supposed to be a mirror, a place where you learn who you are. But in today's system, it's more often a mask. Students learn to conform, to code switch, to hide their natural interests in order to fit in or get ahead. In Jungian terms, this is how the persona, the socially acceptable mask, overtakes the true self. And when this happens, we don't graduate as whole people. We graduate as strangers to ourselves. In the rush to teach subjects, we've forgotten to teach being. We've trained minds, but neglected souls. And that's not just poor education. Teaching, it's spiritual malnutrition. What happens when an entire generation is raised to equate learning with performance, intelligence with compliance, and self-worth with external validation? You get a world full of quiet suffering. It's people who look successful on the outside, but feel hollow on the inside. It's people who achieved all the right things, the degrees, the promotions, the accolades, yet still lie awake at night, wondering, who am I really? This is the invisible wound modern education leaves behind. It's not always loud or dramatic. Often, it's subtle. A gnawing sense of inadequacy, a chronic fear of failure, an inability to slow down, play, or create without guilt. Many adults carry deep shame around not being smart enough, simply because they didn't thrive in traditional classrooms. They believe something is wrong with them, when in truth, something was wrong with the system. One of the most devastating consequences is a fractured sense of identity. When children are constantly judged by standardized metrics, they begin to internalize those judgments. A child who is labeled below average in school may grow up believing they are fundamentally inferior, not just academically, but existentially. And this belief doesn't disappear with age. It festers, shaping how we approach relationships, careers, even love. How can you express your authentic self when you were taught from the beginning that your value lies in being what others want you to be? This is not just personal, it's cultural. When education becomes about obedience rather than awakening, society produces more followers than leaders, more imitators than creators. We become afraid to think differently, speak honestly, or pursue paths that don't fit the mold. And this fear is contagious. It gets passed down generation after generation like a virus of the soul. Even in relationships, this manifests in subtle but destructive ways. We choose partners based on roles, expectations, and social metrics rather than emotional truth. We raise our children with the same fears we were raised with. Will they fall behind? Will they get into the right school? Will they succeed? But we rarely ask, will they know who they are? Will they feel alive? And what about our mental health? Depression, anxiety, burnout, these aren't random epidemics. They are often the symptoms of a life lived out of alignment. A life where the soul has been ignored for too long. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once said that modern people are not starving for bread. They are starving for meaning. And our education system, for all its resources and structure, rarely teaches us how to find that meaning. Historically, we see echoes of this pain. In ancient myths, there are countless stories of heroes who are called to a deeper truth, but are rejected by the world around them. Prometheus, who defied the gods to bring fire, punished for his insight. Socrates, who questioned authority, executed for corrupting the youth. These were not failures of intelligence. They were failures of systems to accommodate truth. And so today, we see millions of quiet rebels, creatives, dreamers, spits, who were never good students, but are now waking up to their inner power. They are realizing that their worth was never tied to a grade, a school, or a title. Their worth was always intrinsic, waiting to be reclaimed. But healing begins with awareness. And awareness begins with the courage to ask, what if the system was never designed to help me thrive? What if my struggle was never a sign of failure, but a sign of misfit, a refusal to shrink myself into a shape I was never meant to hold? If we've inherited a system that conditions us to suppress our uniqueness, seek approval over authenticity, and value performance over purpose, then healing will not come from simply fixing the system. It must come from within us, from a radical shift in how we view learning, growth, and the self. The first step is unlearning the lie that your value is measured by your productivity. You are not a grade. A key, you are not your job title. Key, you are not how well you fit into a standardized mold. Key, true education begins the moment you reclaim your right to learn on your own terms. Key, and for many, that begins with curiosity, not curriculum. Start by asking, what if I always wanted to learn, but never gave myself permission to explore? That question alone can reignite a dormant fire. One powerful tool for this is journaling. It's not the performative kind, but raw, honest dialogue with your inner self. Ask, what did school teach me to hide? When did I stop trusting my voice? These questions aren't just reflective, they're revolutionary. Okay, they help you peel back the layers that formal education often silenced. From a psychological lens, cognitive behavioral therapy offers another practical tool. It teaches you to identify core beliefs, many of which were shaped in childhood classrooms. Beliefs like I'm not smart, I need to be perfect, or if I fail, I'm worthless. These are not truths. They are distortions inherited from a system that prioritized conformity over individuality. CBT helps you challenge and rewrite these scripts, but healing doesn't have to be purely clinical. Ancient wisdom has long known what modern systems forgot. The soul needs ritual. Practices like meditation, contemplative prayer, or even solitude in nature allow space for self-integration. In Sufi tradition, education is not about feeding the intellect, but purifying the heart. Rumi wrote, "You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life?" What if real education was learning to remember those wings? We can also draw from Stoic philosophy, which reminds us that knowledge means little without character. Marcus Aurelius didn't care about memorizing facts. He cared about mastering the self, about aligning action with virtue. What if we redefine success not as being the best, but as becoming whole? Even in our daily lives, we can rebel against the old model by reclaiming learning as a joyful, sacred act. Read what moves you, not what's trending. Learn a craft for the love of it, not for monetization. Make space for curiosity without turning it into a hustle. Celebrate questions more than answers. And perhaps most importantly, normalize imperfection. Normalize not having it all figured out. The most damaging legacy of traditional education is the illusion that there is a clear path, a single right answer, a final destination. But real growth is messy, nonlinear, and deeply personal. Education, at its best, should teach us how to live with mystery, not erase it. So whether you're 17 or 70, know this: you are allowed to start over. You are allowed to redefine what education means for you. The world may hand you a curriculum, but your soul writes its own syllabus. So here we are, standing at the end of a long road paved with tests, grades, deadlines, and expectations, but also standing at the edge of something far more important, a new beginning. 'Cause if there's one truth that echoes through the ruins of outdated systems and the silence of forgotten dreams, it's this: your education was never meant to end when school did. It was always supposed to be a lifelong unfolding of who you truly are. Yes, society sold us a version of education that prized obedience over imagination, credentials over curiosity, conformity over self-awareness. And yes, we may carry scars from that system, wounds of comparison, voices of self-doubt, an inner critic we never invited. But beneath all of that still lies the original spark. It's a part of you that knows, deeply and quietly that real learning is not about approval. It's about awakening. What we've called education has too often been about survival. But what the soul craves is meaning. And meaning doesn't come from a curriculum. It comes from the courage to ask, what matters to me? What truth am I here to live? We cannot wait for institutions to change before we begin to heal. We are the change. One awakened learner becomes one awakened parent, one awakened teacher, one awakened artist, one awakened leader. And slowly, those sparks turn into fire. The ancient Greeks believed that true education was about becoming fully human, not useful, not efficient, but whole. The Sufis believed knowledge should make the heart softer, and the Stoics believed wisdom should be practiced, not preached. These truths still live within us, even if the modern system forgot them. So today, you are invited to remember, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too late. You are exactly where you need to be to begin again, not as a product of a system, but as a student of your own life. Because, in the end, the most powerful education isn't the one that prepares you for the world. It's the one that helps you build it. If this message stirred something in you, a memory, a wound, a dream long buried under years of silent conformity, then this space is for you. This channel isn't here to feed you noise. It's here to invite you deeper into yourself, into truth, into the kind of wisdom that doesn't come from textbooks, but from transformation. We are reclaiming what education was always meant to be, a path of awakening, not conditioning, a return to curiosity, a return to soul. Every video on this channel is crafted for the seekers, those who ask questions that don't always have answers, those who are tired of the shallow noise and crave something real, something that echoes beyond the screen and into the quiet corners of their lives. Here, we blend ancient wisdom with modern psychology. We explore how power, self-awareness, identity, and purpose intersect across time. We study not just what happened in history, but what it means for your inner world today. If you've ever felt out of place in classrooms, in boardrooms, or even in your own mind, you are not alone. In fact, you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to wake up. So if you're ready to step out of passive consumption and into conscious growth, subscribe. Not just to the channel, but to yourself, to your voice, your rhythm, your unfolding. We are building a space where thinkers, feelers, dreamers, and quiet rebels can come together. A space where we don't pretend to have all the answers, but we dare to ask the right questions. Because the real revolution doesn't start in politics or classrooms. It starts in the soul. And when enough of us wake up to who we really are, no system, no deception, no old story can hold us back. This is not just a video. This is a journey. And you are already on it. Welcome home.